Hello! I haven't made a video in a while and I'm really awkward, so I apologise. I would like to start this video with a thank you to Brock from Let's Read. He gave me a shout out recently in a video of his and and my subscriber count practically like tripled within a few days, so it was really intense but also really wonderful, so thank you to him and hello to anyone who has come from that. It's a bit of a coincidence, honestly, because I've been sort of planning something to do with books and obviously videos about that for a while now, like since early October. I've been sort of thinking about something and planning something, and it's just getting to the stage now where I'm about to start it, and so it's just a weird coincidence that I get this sort of boost in subscribers right before I begin talking about that. So look out for a video on that, explaining what that is soonish. Yeah, so I haven't really made a video since I did my Jane Eyre review, and I've kept reading, so I've read all these things, but I haven't made a video on any of them, so I thought I'd just do a collection of reviews, and it's probably going to be quite a long video because I read 7 things since I finished Jane Eyre, and even if I only speak, you know, a couple of minutes on each of them, that's like 14 minutes, so I apologise if this is really long, but I'm not going to edit it because I can't be bothered. So I'll just get started. The first thing I read was Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, a play by Edward Albee, I think. Oh, this is a good play. I love theatre. I did a couple of plays earlier this year. I was like acting in them, which was really fun, and I actually have an audition in like 3 days for another one. Wish me luck. Anyway, this play was amazing. I loved it. It's everything that I love about theatre. The premise is actually really similar to a movie that I saw last year called Carnage, which is that there are 2 couples. They essentially forced to stay in a room for a long time, and social politeness sort of goes a bit out the window. But I really liked this a lot more than Carnage for a few reasons. First of all, there's an age difference between the 2 couples. There's a couple that's sort of middle-aged, or a bit old, slightly older than middle-aged, so probably like 50s, maybe even 60s. So they have a lot of history there with that relationship. And then you have some newlyweds, I think probably mid-20s, around then. And that age difference is interesting to watch, or to read. And I also liked that they're already intoxicated, they're already a bit drunk. It's like 2 AM when the play opens. They've just come back home from a faculty party. So there's already a bit of sort of looseness to the way they're acting, and obviously that sort of continues as they drink more throughout the night. I also really liked the characters, like they were just more fascinating. They were kind of, most of them were detestable. There was really only one character that I actually liked, like that I thought was a good person, which was Honey, the female in the younger couple. And I really wanted to play her. As I was reading it, I was just like, oh, I have so many ideas to play this character, but it was so frustrating because I'm not going to play her anytime soon. I hope to sometime in my life, but yeah, it's not going to happen. But yeah, this is what I love about theatre, just interesting characters interacting in a single room that is completely fascinating. I also watched the movie, like pretty much directly after I finished reading it. I watched the movie by the same name. It was amazing. If you're not super into reading plays, I recommend just watching the movie because it's a fantastic adaptation. And the director died recently. The director, he also directed The Graduate. He died like yesterday. It was just a weird coincidence. Anyway, it was his first movie and it was brilliant. Elizabeth Taylor is in it and she blew me away. She just owned that role and she won an Oscar for it, which was completely deserved. So I gave this 5 stars. I really, really liked it. There was a bit, it was written in the 60s and there's some sort of questionable like gender stuff in here, but for the most part I really liked it. And I had a plot twist, which was quite enjoyable. The next thing I read I don't actually have because I borrowed it from a friend. It's called The Goddess of Troy by P.C. Cast. This book is erotic fantasy fiction, completely out of my wheelhouse. It was very light, very silly. My friend just really loved this book and so I was like, okay, I'll read it. The plot is set in the Trojan War, so you have the main characters there, like Achilles and Agamemnon and so forth. But the goddesses, 3 goddesses, are watching this Trojan War. They're a bit sick of it, to be honest. So they go to modern day. They choose 2 women. They bring them back in the Trojan War to try and woo Achilles, so that he's distracted and thus isn't a part of the war, and the war sort of gets finished. It makes a bit more sense in the novel. But so yeah, there's goddesses, there's sexy times, there's kind of war. I mean, I guess it wasn't like a main focus, I don't think, but there wasn't any like war scenes, but there was war about, you know what I mean? Yeah, so I was surprised by how much I enjoyed this novel, actually, because it actually had a plot, you know, with the time traveling, and it was very funny at times. There was lots of Buffy and Star Trek references, which I liked. Yeah, it was just sort of lighthearted. It's not exactly what I tend to read, but I enjoyed it. So yeah. The next thing that I read is the Paper it's written here, Menagerie, by Ken Liu. This is a short story, a really quick, like, very short story, which I will link down below because it's free online. That's how I read it. This is about an Asian American boy growing up in, you know, white America, and what that sort of did to him, and his sort of uncomfortableness and shame to do with his heritage, and how it affects his relationship with himself and with his mother. It was kind of heartbreaking. It was really touching. I don't want to make it sound like it was just sort of drenched in melancholy, because it wasn't. There were some really sweet moments. It was just really, oh, like, I can't relate directly to that situation, but I can relate to shame and the way that that just sort of eats away at you. And yeah, it was a really good short story, and I recommend it, so I will link it definitely. The next thing that I read, I actually own. It's The Night Watch by Sarah Waters. This is my second Sarah Waters novel. I read Fingersmith earlier this year and really loved it. This is set in 1940s London. And the interesting thing about this novel is that it goes back in time. So it starts in 1947, then it moves to 1944, the last year of the First World War, and then it ends in 1941, the first year of the First World War. And it was interesting how that structure played with the story and played with my investment in the story. It follows 4 different characters throughout that time, and when the book began, you know, early, sort of later in 1947, I wasn't that invested. It felt a bit boring. I was definitely intrigued because I could tell these characters had a past and I wanted to know what that was and so on. But it was like, their characters had to be sort of shrouded in mystery so that the reveals could be kept for later in the book about what actually happened to them. And so I found it very hard to connect to them because they all were just sort of like, ooh, they have a past. Like, you know, they all sort of felt similar. But once I did, you know, get into the past, get into sort of the meat of the story, I really fell in love with them and I really cared a lot. Sarah Waters has this amazing way of creating an atmosphere in her novels, like in particular spaces, like in the actual locations that the characters are. There's a character in the novel who works as a ambulance driver during the First World War, during the Blitz. So she has to go out driving this ambulance when, you know, there are bombs dropping over London, and it was really riveting, I think. And yeah, she's just good at sort of playing with reveals and playing with plot structures. So I was surprised, considering how I started the novel, how much I cared at the end of the novel. And it was interesting seeing how their story started because I already knew where they were going to go. It almost had a nostalgic feel about it when I was at the end of the end of the book and I saw how their story started. It felt almost as if I was the characters themselves looking back and seeing how things began. It was kind of bittersweet. Yeah, I did grow to love this book. I gave it 4 stars. So not as like amazing, mind-blowing as Fingersmith was. It had a bit of a different tone, but I still really enjoyed it. The next book that I read is... Oh, hold on. Oh, come on. Okay, sorry. Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire by J.K. Rowling. This is a reread for me, and I haven't read this in a long time, and this really solidified this book as my favourite of the series. I'd forgotten a lot, and it was interesting. Most of what I really enjoyed in the book were things that had been removed to make the movie. I have like mixed feelings on the movies. I don't think they're necessarily bad, but I think they miss out on a lot of the depth of the story. It sort of, they often shave back so much that it just becomes kind of an action movie. Not an action movie in what we think of, you know, as it's guns and explosions, but just sort of like always go, go, go. There's always something happening. Whereas in the book, there's actual, I feel like there's more characters and there's more depth and there's more themes that are explored. So yeah, I'll just go over some of my favourite moments. I loved practically everything with Winky and Dobby, which were, as far as I remember, completely removed from the movie, which is actually I'm quite impressed at the movie for doing that, because they're quite central in the book, or at least they feel quite central. I think this book explored the prejudices of the magical world a lot more in depth, and it's not just against, you know, Muggle-born witches and wizards anymore, it's against magical creatures. And it was interesting to me to see how the different prejudices of different creatures manifested in different ways. So like against house elves, it manifested as just sort of apathy, like you don't really care about them, they just do their job. In fact, like the sign of a good house elf is not seeing them, not noticing them. So they're sort of less than furniture. And then prejudices against giants, say, it manifests in fear and thus aggression and sort of anger and wanting to attack them. And another one of my favourite moments was with Hagrid when he sort of outed in the Daily Prophet of having, you know, being half giant, and the shame and the backlash that he gets. It made me cry, to be perfectly honest. And I didn't cry in this book when I first read it as a kid, but I cried this time because of that. It actually kind of reminds me of the short story I read about having shame for sort of who you are and where you come from. And yeah, it just sort of broke my heart a bit. I also really love, there's this bit at the end of the book after everything with Voldemort has happened, and it's sort of Harry is in the hospital wing, and sort of there's lots of people there, you know, figuring out what happened and what they should do next. And Cornelius Fudge turns up, and he has a bit of a mental breakdown. It was one of my favourite moments in the entire book. I'd completely forgotten about it because it's not in the movie, and you can see his fear, his abject terror, really, of the idea that Voldemort is back, his denial, his prejudices, his sort of incompetence. And it's not really that he's like a bad guy. He's not evil like Voldemort is. He's just kind of stupid and just unwilling to cooperate and believe that this is, you know, a thing. And you see his prejudices, which I really liked. I loved that whole section where he's just sort of breaking down inside, and it was done so well, and it was contrasted very well with Dumbledore's sort of calm stature during that scene. It was a really good moment. And yeah, so I gave this 5 stars. It's definitely my favourite of the series, which I think is interesting because it could so easily have been the worst. It's the middle book, you know, and so often in series it kind of dips in the middle because the writer will have an idea of how to start it and where they want to end it, but getting there is a bit rocky. So I think this could have very easily have been the worst book because there's, you know, a shift in tone and in plot focus. But I think it's the best. There's just so much stuff packed in here. There's, you know, the Quidditch World Cup, there's the Triwizard Tournament, there's the Yule Ball, there's the Voldemort stuff, there's the mystery with Mad Eye Moody and Snape, and I don't know, it's just, I love this one. The next thing that I read, I didn't even really read. Not really. It was Titus Andronicus, a play by William Shakespeare. I didn't really read this. I watched the movie. and I will link that below because it's actually on YouTube, with subtitles, which I always find helpful with Shakespeare. The reason why I still count this as being read is because I experienced the play, how I like to experience Shakespeare. I feel like there's two different ways you can experience Shakespeare. You can either read it or you can watch it, whether that be a movie or like an actual stage production. And lots of people, I'm sure, enjoy both. They enjoy doing both of them. Or you can have a preference, and I have a very strong preference towards watching Shakespeare because when I try and read it, it's not that I don't get it, it's just that it's a bit dry and I don't feel that sort of investment or excitement that I do. I need help, to be honest. I need like actors and costumes and stuff to make it real, to make it feel alive for me. And I am definitely under the opinion that Shakespeare was meant to be performed, you know. I just think it's just so much more engrossing for me anyway. Yes, and this movie that I watched, it was called Titus, is a perfect movie. And I don't say that very often, but it is astonishingly beautiful. It's kind of hard to watch at some points. It's not just like violence, it's like brutality, and it's like the Game of Thrones of Shakespeare plays. There's questionable morality for all of the characters, but yes, it is like an A-grade film. It's perfect cast. The director by Julie Taymor was perfect. The music was like unexpected but perfect, and the way the music played with the art direction of the costumes and the sets and everything, it was so good. I only have one criticism, was that it was a bit long. It was like 2 hours and 40 minutes. That's a long movie. I don't quite have the attention span for that, so I took a bit of a break in the middle. But even so, I actually think it needed to be that long. Every single scene in that movie was important. It was required for the plot. It was just a really long plot. A lot happened. Yeah, I really liked that movie. I actually watched it twice, like almost back to back, because I just enjoyed it so much. I completely recommend it. So yeah, go check it out if you want. And tell me what you think about reading Shakespeare versus watching Shakespeare and what you think about that. And then the last book that I read recently was The Fault in Our Stars by John Green. Very, very popular book, especially on YouTube. I read this the year it came out, in 2012, I want to say. I'm not entirely sure. And I had mixed feelings about it. Honestly, I went in with certain expectations and pretty much none of them were fulfilled, and so obviously that just resulted in disappointment. Whereas this time I knew exactly what happened. I knew the plot, I knew what was going to happen, so all that was left for me to do was to just notice new stuff that I didn't notice the first time. And I did. I noticed lots of things. I found that it was easier for me to see the characterization of the characters, particularly of, you know, Hazel and Gus, whereas the first time I sort of just heard it in John Green's voice. I watched those two videos of him reading the first couple of chapters, and so when I continued on reading it myself, I just heard it in his voice, and it was very hard. It just felt like both of the characters just felt like John Green light, whereas this time I actually noticed the difference and noticed them. I realised them as complete characters in themselves, and I particularly liked what John Green was doing with Augustus and his character arc. I noticed that a lot more this time. I also noticed how John Green used communication, like text messages and phone calls and emails and letters, non-face-to-face communication, and it was very subtle. It was very sort of not forced at all. It just sort of naturally flowed, the story, through using those different mediums, which I really liked. Yeah, so I'm not entirely sure why this sat so much better for me this time. I think I'm sick. I have a medical condition, a crippling medical condition. I'm not terminal like Hazel is, but I really related to her when, you know, she couldn't walk for 100 meters without sitting down. She struggled upstairs. She took the elevator. Because those are things that I do, you know, and so maybe, you know, my condition is pretty much worse now than ever before. So maybe it was just the right time for me to watch it, read it. and relate even more, you know. I also had a friend die a few months ago, which was hard. I haven't really experienced death like that before. So maybe that was it. This sort of death is a prominent theme in the book, and so maybe that just felt a bit more real for me this time. I don't know. I don't entirely know why, but I'm really glad I reread it. I originally had it at 2 stars, and I bumped it up to 4 stars, which is quite the improvement. I think I just overall judged it a bit too harshly the first time I read it. YA, particularly contemporary YA, is not really my thing. But yeah, I did really enjoy it. So that's it. That's all I've read since I finished Jane Eyre. I'll be having a few more videos up shortly. Thank you for watching. I'm gonna go now. Goodbye.